SUVs. And it took me all of December and all of January to move it. And then I called in a moving company for the furniture.
How was lunch today?
Took me
Usual goes.
How is that?
Sign in. Okay. Where are we supposed to be?
Right over here, wherever you want. Yep. We actually normally shuffle a lot and make long lines of chairs, and I realized it's extra work, but then trying to shuffle around the long line of people with, anyway. You should have prepared some comedy for filler.
So thinking you want to shuffle, you can do.
Shuffle. I told David wrong that he should make a song called the Senior Center Shuffle.
You should. That'd be fun.
We can all do that together too. See?
I'll dance to almost anything.
Collaborative.
Except I draw the line at the Macarena.
No more.
No.
Same tune as the low and shuffle, but yeah, slow.
There you go.
There you go. That sounds like a plan.
Well, thanks for coming. We might get a few more through the door over here. If you haven't gotten a chance, they're starting to play cribbage over here in the next room, but there's some work of Chris's in the Aspen room. And I'm excited to have Chris here today because, well, it's funny. I think I met him randomly at the Donkey Creek Festival in Gillette like 15 years ago and just started talking with him. And then he's been very active posting, his work over the years. And as I met him, I was interested because he was a teacher over there in Gillette and taught art to lots of grade levels. So I'll let him talk about those things. But I love seeing your work, and this all is exciting to see together, and this evolution of, as I'm putting the titles up on the title cards and the dates, you start looking at this process that's been at least, well, I'm sure it's much longer than that, but there's 14 years between all this. 2011, I think, was this earliest one. So people look up and say, why gorillas? And in Wyoming, we're used to seeing, moose and landscapes, and it's a pretty picture, but the neat thing with this is it makes people ask questions and think. So the other great thing with having an artist talk is you don't always get to hear the story behind it. So you can go into a museum and read all the text and learn that end of it, but then art is really about what you start to put together and the story that it means for you too. So if you have a title on a tag that says untitled, there's no title to it. It's pretty open to interpretation, but when you put text with anything, then it's more concrete. So I'm excited to have Chris's work up because this to me feels very philosophical. So there are a lot of questions and it's open to some interpretation and meaning. I think we connect with gorillas, especially in a different way. I'll talk more probably after because I don't want to say too much before you talk. But I've also, not to put pressure on him, but I've been telling people, well, this is probably the most notable artist we've had so far just because he's got a big name and you probably will see his name around. And historically, because I like to think about art history and such and the longevity of it, I really think that Chris probably will have made a really big impact and people will be looking at your paintings in 500 years. And that's part of this, is it's all recording history. We're in a weird time frame right now where we have people who live without plumbing. I still have to haul water into a cistern. And that builds character. But now all of a sudden we have computers in our pockets. So that to me, in talking about the evolution and gorillas, the apes, we have a different connection with them as beings. So anyway, I'll say more afterwards because I have some insight too, but I want to hear from Chris and I'm excited to hear more about him.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'll try not to bore you with the work or with my speech. Oh, sorry.
Oh, that comes out too. You can walk with it.
Okay.
You're not static there.
I just got a lecture from my wife in drawing, my wife and my daughter at Thanksgiving, that since I quit teaching, I talk too softly and they can never understand what I'm saying, so I'll use the microphone. I appreciate the accolades that Danica has manufactured for me, but my line is always, I worked at this really hard and I've been at it for a long time, but I'm in no immediate danger of being corrupted by wealth or fame. But I do work every day on this work, and I've been at it since I was in graduate school. That's when I started working and exhibiting as widely as I could. That was in 1972, I guess. And I've been at it since then, and I retired from teaching almost 19 years ago. Early retirement. I was only 12 when I retired. And I work at it every day, and I exhibit wherever I can. I am a Wyoming boy. I've been told from time to time I'm not a Wyoming artist. And I always say, I was born in Wyoming, educated in Wyoming. I've lived in Wyoming all but 4 years of my life, which is now 75 years. So I've lived in Wyoming 71 of those 75 years. I don't know how you decide that I'm not a Wyoming artist, but I'm not a cowboy. And I rode a horse the first time when I was 33, I think. I'm not a hunter. I used to camp, but I don't camp anymore. I do like to be out in the mountains, but I'm not a mountain climber. I've got artificial joints galore, and climbing rocks is not something I want to try anymore. But I guess it has to do with the subject matter. Most of this show is made up of this series, which I call the Gorilla Portal series. And I'll talk a lot about that in a little bit. But this series is kind of an outlier in the broad scheme of my work. Most of my work starts out very abstractly and intuitively. And most of the time it's not working directly from a model. It's working for models inside my head. But I have spent thousands and thousands of hours of drawing the human form from life. I was fortunate in the late 60s and early 70s to get good training in classical drawing techniques at a time when that was not fashionable. My mentor, Richard Evans at the University of Wyoming, was a superlative drawing teacher and painting teacher. And when I draw from memory, it's informed by literally thousands of hours of drawing from life. There are two works in this that are more recent than this Gorilla series. And they're the two that are on wooden panels in the next room over this way. And they're brand new. I'm working on a third one in that series now. couple of years ago, I decided to start working in, when I was working on this, I'm working in series. So most of my work is more abstract. I've never done a completely abstract drawing or painting. So, but most of the time when I'm drawing, I take the lesson from Picasso. One of my favorite Picasso quotes is, to know what you want to draw, you have to begin drawing. So I just start making marks on a page or on a slab of wood or on a canvas. And I'm looking for a structure, a design that seems pleasing to me. I refer to it as visual rhythm and rhyme. I like visual rhythms of spacing and shapes. And once I get a purely intuitive and abstract division of shape, then I start looking at it and deciding what it is. And most often for me, it turns into human figures and faces and hands, especially faces, hands, and feet, because those are the things that seem most expressive to me. So those two in there are a current series that I just began about a month ago. And if you want to know more of that kind of work, I can go to my website. I'd be glad to give you the web address later on, and it has a really wide range of work. But about the gorillas and the portals, people ask me about that a lot, about why gorillas. And I've been fascinated with gorillas since I was a small child. And I took classes in primate social behavior to satisfy my science requirements at the University of Wyoming. I like all kinds of monkeys and apes, but gorillas are my favorites. I was always told by the readings and things back in the 70s when I was taking these classes that the chimps are the most intelligent of the non-human apes. And I always said gorillas just aren't telling us everything they know. They keep their cards closer to the vest. Chimpanzees are very much like us. They're very violent. They fight with each other. They wage wars on each other. They do all kinds of things. Gorillas are enormously powerful creatures, but are by and large very mild-mannered and gentle unless they're challenged. And if they are challenged, they can literally pull your arm off if they want to. Anyway, I grew up as a small, skinny kid who liked art and music, and took a lot of grief for that from time to time. And I always imagined being a 500-pound creature who could lift 10 times his weight, and thinking that would be a kind of a cool thing to be. The more I learned about gorillas and their intelligence, the more excited I got by them. I've also been fascinated by the idea of portals for a long time. Portals, in my view, or the way I use them, are windows and sometimes doorways into alternate realities. And when I think about them, I realize that what I do all the time as an artist is create alternate realities. I'm not a realist. I can draw realistically because I've worked very hard at that. But I always either stop short of what people refer to now as photographic realism, or I go past it a bit, which is what I'm doing in these. I've always kind of had trouble with labels, so I've always been kind of loath to label what I do, especially since it varies pretty widely stylistically and in terms of subject matter. But in New York City about 5 years ago, my wife and I were walking back to the station after looking at a show of surrealist drawings. And she said, you've really always just been a surrealist, haven't you? And I thought about it for a minute and said, I guess I have. She said, well, that's, when people ask me, I can't think of anything else to say. That's what I tell them. So these, I think of these as beyond realism. But, and unlike those drawings in there, and unlike most of the work I do, I'm working from photographs largely, with a lot of random invention. But, and I work from my own photographs exclusively because I lectured students for many, many years about plagiarism and what a bad idea that was. And so I have strong feelings about using other people's images. There is one exception. This gorilla in this King Kong one here is holding the globe here of the earth under his head. And I have not been in space. I stole that image from National Geographic and readily acknowledge that. But it was desperation. I didn't have any other way to get that image. And these paintings, rather than just, I sketch out an idea, but I assemble from bits and pieces of my own photographs. I assemble them. I'm very sorry. That's my glucose monitor telling me I ate too much, too many carbohydrates too much. Sorry about that. It might go off again. It's very loud. Where was I? Most of these I assembled a basic arrangement in the computer and use that as an initial model. And I use photographs that I've taken of gorillas in zoos around the country. And in one case, a chimpanzee, the large face in the back of that is a chimp. And I use them as references, but if you looked at any one image of a gorilla in here and then looked at the photographs that I used as models, you will notice that they really don't look that much like the photographs, because I'm using those as a starting point and imagining everything else based on my memory of looking gorillas in the face in various places, various zoos, and so on. And I've been studying gorillas for a long, long time. The same goes for the large hands and things in those drawings in there. When I want a hand and it's not in the right position, I snap a photo of it with my phone and look at it. But then I just draw from memory of what I looked at. When I make a painting or a drawing, there's a variety of concerns that seem like separate concerns, but they're all interwoven in the process of making an image. The first is structural design. I'm really interested in making interesting arrangements of things that have what I mentioned earlier, rhythm and rhyme. And that means exactly what it sounds like. The way that things are arranged creates certain kinds of rhythms, the images and the spaces between them and the way they're arranged across that space. So if you wanted to get really ridiculously pedantic about it, you could say, this is a quarter note, that's an eighth note, that's a dotted whole note, and that's a half note right there. That's how it works. It creates a rhythm across, and it needs variety. It needs sometimes syncopation in order to be interesting. My mentor, Mr. Evans at UW, in a conversation with him when he was in his late 80s, he told me I won't try to imitate his voice. I can, and it's funny, but I'm not gonna do it again. Because he was always talking around a pipe. But he said, I've always felt that an artist's first responsibility is to be not boring. And I try very hard to create images, first of all, that don't bore me, because I think if I'm boring myself, then I don't have any chance at interesting anyone else. And that's why I change directions fairly frequently. But I always try to have a coherent set of things that work together. The next thing, after that basic design, is the narrative of the image that I'm making. When I was a student, illustrator was a pejorative for a lot of people that I came into contact with. If they said you're an illustrator, that means you draw too well and you're not being sensitive enough or something. And if they said you're just an illustrator, that was just crippling. But over the years, I've come to understand that that's an essential part of who I am. I am a storyteller, and my language is visual language. And specifically, visual metaphor. For instance, these guys are not just gorillas. What I'm painting about is the human condition. And they stand in for us. In there is a painting over on that wall, which is called At the Portal Hesitating. And it was the second, it wasn't a series yet when I did it. This one was the genesis of this series, but it was done in 2011, and it was a long time before I did another one that related to it, and I said, oh, that might be a series. So that one in there was done, I think, in 2018. And at the top is a two-faced figure, or face, looking both directions at once, which looks suspiciously like me, because I was the handiest model. But it's the Roman god Janus, who is the god of beginnings and ends and portals and windows and gateways. And he sees both the past and the future. The gorilla at the bottom, standing at the portal, is my version of every man. And he represents me, and my intent is that he represents other people too. And he can't see the future and the past. For him, the future is just conjecture, and the past is memory, and our memories are amazingly unreliable. I've read that the longest we can hold on in our memory to a single event without altering it is estimated to be about 6 seconds. And each time we recall an event, we're starting to subtly change the way we see it. So that's one of the reasons why witnesses are not very reliable witnesses in legal matters. Another important part of that is that roughly 20% of the information that reaches our visual cortex in our brain comes from our retinas, and roughly 80% of it comes from our memory centers and our imaginative centers in our brain. So we are hardwired to be subjective and not be able to hold on to memories without reinventing them as we tell them each time. And I'm notorious for that, telling stories where they say, that's not the way you told that last time. But good storytelling involves embellishment as much as it involves reporting. Anyway, so the everyman at that gate is hesitating because every time we go through a portal from one situation to another, it's a little bit fearful, it's a little bit hesitant, because we feel like we need a change, but we don't know what's there. And sometimes staying with where you are, even if it's boring or even if it's negative, is a little more comfortable than taking a step into the next thing. So that's the narrative of that, more or less. I used to be loath to give titles to things because my conceit was my language is drawing and painting. That's what I'm using. And a good painting should tell its own story. But a former student of mine who is a good friend and sometime collaborator said to me one day, yes, but Chris, you can't expect everyone else to be on the same page you are. They need a way into what you're trying to tell them. So I took that to heart and I try to make my titles give you a hint of what the narrative is. Just making sense. Okay. I tend to be really random and tangential when I talk, and if I get too, Mike's going to give me the stink eye, so I can ease up on that. But the author Kurt Vonnegut said in one of the books, every painting is one half of a conversation between two people, and I think that's right. My paintings and drawings, I intend to be a kernel of a negative, of a narrative, a beginning of a story. And the hope is that viewers will see something that resonates with themselves, and they will get engaged enough to finish that story or to create their own narrative based on that. By that, I don't mean it means whatever you want it to mean. That's just a lazy thing to say. Because I always have a specific narrative in mind. Sometimes it's sort of nebulous, but it's always, it's always an intended narrative. But long ago I realized that all of that intent of mine comes through my sensibility and my awareness and my memories, all of which are very unique to me and limited in a lot of ways. And every viewer that looks at that is coming at it from his or her or their own set of sensibilities. And it's almost impossible for them to see exactly what I intended. And that's true of books, it's true of stories, true of folk tales, certainly true, I learned very early in my Sunday school career, it's true of scriptures. But sometimes my interpretations were very, very, very different than those I was being taught. So I'm comfortable with people reacting in their own way, although sometimes they've told me things they see in my paintings that shock me. I'm thinking, what is the matter with you? But I promise not to voice that to anyone who comments on my paintings. It's an internal thing. That one's not me. For me, every painting is a portal. For me, every good book is a portal. Every good movie. They're all designed to give you another reality to contemplate other than the one you're in. And the more glimpses you can give yourself into other realities, the larger your awareness and I blanked out the word, sorry. Yes. Jim and I have talked about that, about losing words in minutes. It's one of those inexorable things that we hate but can't do anything about. Anyway, I lost my train of thought.
I think you were gonna answer a question for me.
Okay, let's do that.
When you go into another portal, you were saying that gives you an opportunity to explore another imaginary reality. You're going to say something like that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It grows your world view.
It does.
Yeah.
I have another tangential story about that, but I'll save it. But it does, I think that looking at paintings, if you assume that every painting is a portal, looking at them and contemplating them, regardless of whether you decide to go the direction that portal is pulling you, enlarge your consciousness and they make us larger people, in my view. Every time you read a good book, particularly one that's really well written and has a really good narrative, it makes your awareness larger and it makes you larger. And that's my wish. I would start to say secret wish, but it's not secret. I say it all the time out loud. That's my wish for my work, that whatever narrative I've begun to tell, and they're always sort of, they're couched in, I call it metaphor. I had an English teacher tell me that you can't use metaphor to talk about visual images, but I think that's nonsense. He insisted it was just a literary thing. But the Greek roots of it mean to bear across. And it's to take you from one meaning to another and find a relation, a common meaning between those two things. And the surrealists like Magritte did it very radically, but you take an image, and Dali, those guys, take an image and another image that doesn't seem to have any relationship, and they insist that these have something in common that you should confront. Mine are usually not quite that extreme, but even if, or we all find ourselves in realities that we've built for ourselves, and we've constructed them very carefully. And when you're, the more carefully you've constructed it, in my view, this is all just my really talking about myself, but like all of us, I like to imagine that my way of thinking is not radically different than everyone else's, even though I like to think it is. But we all need sometimes to look through windows and see what's happening to over there. And whether or not we decide to, we're always invited to go to that new reality, or often, but whether or not we decide to go to that new reality is not what matters. So what matters is our awareness and how inclusive our awareness of realities can be. I've said frequently that because I was a teacher for a long time, my idea of what art is, and what the idea of art can encompass, is much broader and much more inclusive than it was when I was an art student. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Okay. I photograph these guys in zoos because that's the only way I have access to them. I would really like to go on one of those gorilla treks into the mountains in Rwanda, but I'm 75 and I have a lot of titanium joints, and the idea of climbing through the jungle in the mountains in Rwanda doesn't sound like something I'm capable of doing anymore. So I go to zoos and I photograph gorillas, and I am aware that they are very intelligent creatures. They know they're captive, and that breaks my heart a little bit. But at the same time, I'm grateful that I get to see them, I get to study them, and I get to photograph them. And I've had a couple of kind of eerie close encounters with them. This guy that's in this portal. This is the first painting that I I did another ape series a few years before, but this is the first one that I titled Portal. That's the title of this painting. This was done from some photographs I took of the shelf in one of my storerooms in my art room at Campbell Valley High School. And all of these things were drawing casts that I purchased, not with my own money, but purchased for the program. And they were stacked on the shelf in that room. And then this was a garden ball that I bought from Walmart, one of those big mirrored balls about this big. And it was sitting in a box. And I photographed that because I loved the idea of trying to paint these very distorted views of these forms out here, and the challenge of that. Also because I've always been fascinated by mirrored balls because they present us with an entire universe of which we're the exact center. And everybody wants a universe that's centered around himself, you know. As if you look at a mirror, just try it with a Christmas tree ornament. You look at that ornament, no matter how you turn it, you're the exact center of that world that's reflected. And because it's a sphere, it reflects the entirety of that world. So even if I had a mirror here, it would show that wall, but it would also show this wall, but squeezed into a tiny little edge at the top. And that has always fascinated me, that there's that world that exists there. Maybe that's not me. So I was doing the painting of that, but obviously what was reflected in that ball was me with my camera and the other wall of that room, which was a very boring cinder block wall with pipes and things on it. And I had just been to the Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha and had taken several photographs of that silverback gorilla there. And at one point, he was sitting on one side of the 6-inch thick plexiglass, and I was on the other side. So except for the barrier between us, we were no more than 3 feet apart. And I was using a digital SLR camera at the time, and I would photograph him, and then I'd turn it around, and he would study his own image. And then when I turned the camera around again, he would freeze and pose. And I thought, this guy knows exactly what is happening here. And I watch a lot of videos of those gorilla tricks in the mountains in Rwanda, and they always tell them, don't make eye contact with the silverbacks. That's just not a good idea. It's a threat. And they're enormously strong creatures. But he made direct eye contact with me several times. And it was a really, really moving experience. So I decided to paint him in place of me. And then I decided that because he was in a zoo, I would put him in a different environment. So I replaced the wall of that room with this brick wall that's distorted because of the reflection. But then I painted blue sky and green grass and stuff around that to give him, in my fantasy, a place to go other than that enclosure he was in the zoo. When I started the rest of these paintings, that was my thinking. These guys are in a place that they haven't chosen, so I want to give them other alternatives. And I thought, that's what I do all the time anyway. I have a banner ad that I made that I put on Facebook every now and then that says at the top, alternate realities is what I do. Well, this one, for instance, instead of sitting in a zoo, I gave them some lush grass and some trees and so on. And over on this side, this is from my daughter-in-law's garden in the Twin Cities, with hostas and some bricks. Some trees from Minnesota, but those trees over there are from Hawaii and all this grass. That's as close as I can come to a tropical environment. I took a lot of photographs in Hawaii of bamboo and so on. And then I gave them this is a sample, a little patch of snow from my front yard with a leaf in it, and picture of Donkey Creek in Gillette in the fall, and outside my daughter's front window in Eagan, Minnesota, and my backyard reflected in a little crystal ball lens that I was given for my birthday once. And I gave them all those realities to consider, knowing that they would probably be content to stay in that lush green grass. But everybody deserves a choice. And I know that I'm not actually giving these captive gorillas any place to go, but in my fantasy I am. And that's really the narrative in a capsule of all of these gorilla paintings. That one over there, that's the only one that isn't oil, that's painted on a canvas panel in acrylic gouache. It's called Welcome Home, Weary Traveler. The environment he's in is volcanic rock and some trees and some bamboo trees in the distance. That's from a shot in Hawaii. And then the thing through the portal where he's been and has decided to return from is my backyard in Gillette at twilight, one summer night.
Well, Chris, will you
Yes.
tell us about gouache? People ask what that word is a lot when
Okay.
I see it.
That's good. A good question. Traditional gouache is opaque watercolor. It's watercolor that's had white clay mixed into it to make it opaque rather than transparent. It's what animation cells were painted with before computers took over. It was a very popular medium in commercial art illustration for a long time. Works really well in an airbrush and so on. But acrylic gouache is a newer invention that it's an acrylic-based paint that looks and acts like gouache. The advantages of gouache are, the chief advantages is very photographable because it's a matte surface after it dries. And the advantage of acrylic gouache is you can lay down one layer and put another layer over it without the layers mixing together, which is a thing that plagues you constantly if you're working in traditional gouache, because the paint isn't permanent. Did I answer that? My oldest brother, the first time he ever saw that word in one of my shows, and he knows better, he was an English teacher. He said, "What is this goulash you keep talking about?" That was my brother Don. He's the most recent loss in our family. Died about a year ago. He had just turned 80, but he'd had multiple myeloma for 12 years before. It was a long, but I posted just the other day on Facebook. I don't very often quote my oldest brother, but this was a good one from a phone conversation about 30 years ago with him. I said something about common sense, and he said, "There's never been anything common about sense." I think that's a priceless quote, and it's very true. Incidentally, this was the first of this batch is in there. It's got a long, ridiculous title. See if I can remember it off the top of my head. It's two matriarchs choose to ignore the portal. The cosmic gatekeeper signals that while all are welcome, be careful what you wish for. That's the full title. And if you're looking, you can see it's two female gorillas. Most of these are silverbacks. But, The most recent one on canvas is that one over there, which is titled Kindred Portal Spider Monkeys. The spider monkeys are not apes, but they are primates. And they're painted on a fake log, because that's where they were when I saw them. And the gorillas are in a nice lush bamboo forest, and they're kind of feeling empathy of some sort, I guess. And just because they're spider monkeys, if you look closely at it, there's a big spider up in the corner, which was, I photographed on the bottom of my grill one day when I was trying to grill dinner.
I thought it was a spider, but then I was like, it looks like it's hair.
It does
But
blend
I
in.
didn't notice it until I was looking at my camera, a picture of it.
That was deliberate camouflage.
So it's funny how those things happen when you look at it multiple times.
Well, it's a larger spider than it actually was. I
Yeah.
increased it by about tenfold to make it creepier. But
Yeah.
although I like spiders, just before Thanksgiving, got bitten by one right here that finally faded after about a week. That's quite a big bump during my sleep. An upsetting thing, but I like spiders. When they're in my studio, I leave them alone because they can curl up fruit flies and stuff that fly around in there. And are there other questions? Or have I talked too long? Yes?
Have you read the book series? There's 3 of them in the series called Ishmael.
Yes.
Okay. Because I started thinking about that book. And I probably read it about 2011, actually.
Mhm.
And if you haven't read it, that's what I've always say it's really interesting because I'll just say it's about a gorilla.
Yeah.
And I read the first book last because it was an assignment for a class. Actually, it was a diversity class. So it's funny because now we're talking about, gorillas. But
Well, it's a very smart gorilla.
it's worth a read too because it's an interesting tale.
Yeah. I find them endlessly fascinating. A couple of years ago, I was at the zoo in Como Zoo in Minneapolis, where a lot of these gorillas live. That guy over there, that's the same gorilla twice over there. But and I was with my then five-year-old grandson Ira, and he asked me how strong is a gorilla, so I Googled it right there. It said adult male gorillas theoretically could lift 10 times their own weight. And I thought, this guy weighs 500 pounds. So they're amazing creatures, but they tend to be very gentle and mild-mannered. They fight over women sometimes, but yes, sir.
Was Coco a gorilla or a chimpanzee?
She was a gorilla.
She was?
I did my term report in primate social behavior on her. She was a fairly new phenomenon then, but there was a lot of arguing about whether or not she actually did sign language or if she was just mimicking the adults, but she did some things that were inventive. The first time they showed her a Halloween mask, she didn't have a sign for that, so she called it an I-hat, which is pretty perceptive. And when she asked for a kitten, then she got one that had no tail, so she named it All Ball. She was a very interesting character. I just read, just recently, that she was an avid watcher of the Mr. Rogers show. And when Fred Rogers actually showed up to visit her, she made him sit down and she took off his shoes. because he's not Mr. Rogers unless he's taken off his shoes when you first meet him. She had some pretty interesting interactions with Robin Williams too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that. That's fascinating.
But there's a bonobo named Kanzi who just died sometime this year, sometime in 2025. He was kind of the patriarch of the bonobos at what used to be called the Great Ape Center in Des Moines. Now it's called something like Primate Intelligence Center. He learned to make fires by watching the graduate students who were working there. And his sister, whose name was Combination, watched the researchers drive a golf cart around. And then when they weren't looking, she climbed into it and started it up. And she hadn't figured out how to steer or where the brakes were. So caused a little havoc. But they're very clever animals. As are we. We're very clever animals. But we're not as clever as we think we are a lot of the time.
Did anybody, any of the other primates,
I'm sorry, say
did
that.
any of the other primates learn to paint?
That was another presentation I did for that class back in 1969. Or 70, I guess. I did my semester or my midterm report on drawings and paintings by monkeys and apes. And it was written by Desmond Morris, remember him? He wrote the Naked Ape, what was it?
Oh, yeah.
And they were all chimps they were talking about then. And they did finger paintings, but they all kind of had the same shape because a chimp's way of building a nest at night is to reach out and pull things in toward them. So their paintings tended to be fan shapes, done that same way. But one chimp had done a bunch of those. He was being observed and filmed. And they gave him another canvas after that and the paints, and he sat and looked at it a long time, and then he deliberately went the other way. And they said that's a cognitive decision, a creative decision for a chimp. That how can I do this differently?
Variables. I talk about variables a lot with art.
Yeah,
So it's like, well, I did it this way, I'm gonna do it the opposite way.
yeah. There was a couple, their last name was Kellogg, who did a study in about the late 50s, early 60s about how children learn to draw a human form. And it was worldwide, except for cultures like Orthodox Judaism, where they don't allow, and some Muslim cultures where they don't allow representing a human form. But other than that, worldwide, no matter whether they were in remote villages in South Africa or in New York City, follow the same series of, except for kids who are gifted at drawing. And they had one chimp who went through about the first 4 steps toward, but then he got to the head, and it's not the same thing for a chimp as it is for a human. But I don't know what to make of that.
What were the steps like?
Yeah. I do not remember drawing as a very small kid. And when I was a kid, we didn't have kindergarten in Worland. So first grade was my first school experience. And my teacher, Louise Dyer, at Southside Elementary School in Worland, had a little girl stand on the desk and told us to draw her. And then she called my parents and said, she'd been teaching 30 years, and I was the first one who drew from the model that she'd ever had. And I don't have that drawing, but I have a bad Polaroid of it. And I drew her in her little pinafore dress and all that. Her name was Kim Bateman, by the way. It was 1956.
It's funny.
One of those things that happens to you is you have great long-term memory, but you can't remember those sentences you just started this day. That happens to me a lot. But anyway, from then on, I knew that's what I wanted to do. Had no idea what being an artist meant, except that when I drew things, people got excited, and I won a purple ribbon at the fair and got 75 cents for it. And that was a big deal.
It's funny, just one person or one moment, then all of a sudden you say, aha, this is interesting, and then
Yeah.
whether it's when you're a kid or it can still happen as an adult.
Yep.
If you're willing to try something new, I hear I can't a lot, but it's like, but did you try? But do you care to try too? You know, if you're not interested in it, then that's just not for you. But it's like a puzzle, you know?
That's one of the exciting and most terrifying things about being a teacher. That you can make an offhand remark to a third grader and scar her for life. Mike was a teacher too. We both taught art in Gillette. Mike is Mike Plord, if you don't know him. He's an amazing plotter. Does wonderful work, and he was a great teacher too. When he came along, he made the rest of us step up our game a little bit. But I started my teaching career teaching college classes at UW as an MFA candidate, and then I taught for a year on a one-year contract at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. Then our first child came along, and I was between jobs, and we didn't have any money, so I went to work for an engineer for a couple of years, drawing cross sections of drainage, which was really stimulating. And then we moved back to Gillette, my wife's hometown, and I taught 5 years of elementary school and then 24 years of high school, which turned out to be where I belonged. Although teaching elementary school was the most fun, it was just exhausting. I don't know how people do it for a whole career. But I had a lot of anxiety during my teaching career because it's my nature. But anxiety about teaching when I should be working. And as often as possible, I worked along with my kids, and I worked outside of school and exhibited and so on, but I always felt that I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing. And then I retired and had the time to do this full time and sank into fairly deep depression for about 6 months because I had a little crisis of identity there. I've been a teacher for so long, and all of my shtick, like juggling and balancing things on my nose and telling bad jokes, I had no audience for anymore. It was tough. But thinking about it in retrospect, first of all, you remember the good stuff that happened with kids and the times they made you laugh, and you don't really remember the conflicts very much unless you really dig. But I realized that being a teacher made me a better artist, and it certainly made me a broader artist, less judgmental about different kinds of work and more open to a variety of approaches, and made me. The other great thing about it is if you teach, you have to know how to do a whole bunch of different kinds of processes. So it gives you far more choice. I tried to stay active in the state secondary art educators thing. I was the president for a while. And after I graduated, that's how I think of it. After I retired, I stayed active, as active as I could. And I was on their scholarship committee for a while. And some of the other teachers on the committee would be, say they're looking for people who have a coherent body of work that's all in
boring.
pursuit of a coherent set of ideas. And I would say, they're 17, 18 years old. What? Why on earth do you want them to narrow their prospects that much when they're still in the developmental stages, intellectually and in terms of brain activity and so on, and God knows even hormonal activity. But anyway, this is kind of getting really tangential again. Sorry. Are there other questions? Anything else you'd like to know about these paintings?
Well, the one thing is to the books back here.
About the last 15 or so years that I was at Campbell County High School, I decided to do life drawing with them. I'm embarrassed to say up till that time, I didn't trust my students enough to think that they could handle it, because drawing a human figure is hard. And there was a visiting dance troupe at Camplex in Gillette, the Cleo Parker dance troupe from Denver. And they offered to bring some dancers up and model for my classes. And I said, okay. And kids really got involved in that. So I said, I need to be doing this. So anyway, but I always drew along with them when we did that. Because whenever I was able, I worked on my own work while they were in class. I always treated teaching, even when I taught third grade, treated it as an artist in residency. Because I thought it was valuable for them to see me working. And in fact, I had a girl working independent study during my planning period one year because she didn't have another spot in her schedule. And I was working on a study for a painting, and I would draw it and then I'd erase it, swearing under my breath, and draw it again and erase it again. And when she left, the bell rang and she gathered up all her stuff, and then she came over and she said, "You have no idea how much good it did me to see you struggle so much." And
Yeah.
I think that that's true, that it's good for them to see you do things from start to finish and see the struggle that goes into it and see how long it takes.
Yeah. Process and problem solving along the way.
Yeah, that painting I worked on an average of about 4 to 6 hours a day for 7 months. Because I painted layers. I painted a very thin, watery layer, and then I started building things up. When I had a photographer photographing it from Casper photographing that, and he called me, and he said, "I can't get those blacks in the gorilla." And I said, "That's because there's no black paint in it. That's about 8 layers of alternating blue and red and green." And they're all transparent, so they're all in there, and they all refract light differently, and that's what makes them deep. The purple is just kind of my being fanciful. Actually, the blue gorillas are closer to reality. That's kind of what color gorillas look like when you see them in the sunshine. But purple, I thought, I always liked that poem about I never saw a purple cow. And I used to have a dog named Purple, because a color that resonates with me a lot. This painting, been about 7 or 8 years ago. There was a play on Broadway, a musical called King Kong. And it was based on the 1929 or whatever it was, the stop action movie about King Kong. And my wife and I took my daughter to New York because we were visiting her, and her ex-husband pulled me off to the side and said, "Sarah needs a break, you need to take her somewhere." And so we took her to New York to see some plays. And I'd been really anxious to see that play. And it was not a good play. The music and the book were pretty forgettable, but the 2-story tall, 2,000-pound marionette that played King Kong was fascinating and should have gotten a Tony just for that. And the special effects that they did were amazing. Anyway, so that marquee is the actual marquee of that, for that play. And then everything else in there that's through a portal is a New York scene. The one up on the top is from one of the underground sort of cave-like areas that they have in Central Park, where we walked in there and encountered an operatic tenor who was built like he was a baritone, but he was built like Pavarotti, only much taller. And he was in full white tie dress, and he was singing basically mucho, accompanied by an accordionist who was just a music busker who happened to run into him. He was there to have for a photo shoot, a promotional photo shoot. They encountered this accordion player, and they decided to do a number together, and it was thrilling. And I thought, only in a big city can things like this happen. And then all the greenery I made up based on photographs from Hawaii, and the scene with the Empire State Building, and it was a bright sunlit day, but I made it foggy and twilight, which was a lot harder than I expected it to be. Took several tries, but anyway, that's how these things materialize. That book was a book about Rembrandt that I used as a model, and that shaped word gorilla that's partly shown on there is the single hardest thing in that painting. I painted that and painted it out about 8 times before it actually worked. But anyway, that's how these things materialize. They start off with an overall idea, but they morph as you go along. There's an evolutionary process that happens, or one thing suggests another, and the idea evolves as you go along. And all of them are like that. The very last one in this is that one over there. Of this, it's a adult female gorilla, looking through the window of my basement studio, which would be impossible because the window well is only about this big. But and it's on paper, and I had started that many years before as part of a separate thing and abandoned it because I didn't think it was going well, and then I pulled it out and finished it as part of this. And it's called Turnabout Portal because she's looking through at me instead of me looking through at her. And the little objects that are lined up on the windowsill are things that represent my children and my wife and so on. And the birds that I feed every day in my backyard.
I noticed the toy because you have a whole toy series.
Yeah. In fact,
And you included one here.
yeah. And that drawing of the cat.
Yeah.
My daughter, who just turned 50 a few months ago, did that drawing for me when she was about 5. and folded the paper and gave it to me, and that's the model for that drawing.
Cool.
And she recognized it immediately when I put it online, so.
That's funny. All the pieces.
Actually, the toy fish was not one of my kids' toys. It's, my last year of teaching, a girl in my class who was a cheerleader gave me that during Spirit Week. Said it was a spirit fish. It's actually a little squirt toy. And I put it in several drawings and paintings. So the wooden kind of Asian-looking shape is a wooden perfume bottle from a gift I gave my wife shortly after we got married, which was 54 years ago.
What was with your wife, you said?
There's a bottle that's kind of got
I'll bring it to
a shape
you.
to it. This wooden bottle right here. I've also painted that several times on drawing.
I apologize, but I have another appointment.
That's quite all right. I didn't mean to ramble so long. It's been more than an hour.
Well, it's good to hear all of it because there's a lot to understand, and
Well,
it does mean something for everybody different, but you know, your intention and your thought process behind it. And
Speaking of intention and thought process, I'm fascinated by the dimensionality of this particular picture, especially the cardboard box that is reaching out. And initially I thought it's an empty box because everything is there, but when you look underneath, you can see that there's still something in it.
oh,
There has to be something still in it because it's weighing down
yeah. Well,
the
there's
mattress.
a
So,
lot of stuff in it, and this ball
Right.
is sitting on top.
so I'm wondering what else is in that box?
Well, that's a matter for conjecture.
And you said this was the first of the series, right?
Yes.
So the rest of, so whatever is in there maybe,
Could be the germs of all these other things.
exactly,
Exactly.
well, and talk too about trompe l'oeil because I don't know that most
Yeah.
people know that term.
It's a French word for folie eye. There was a movement by that name in the United States. And, what was I saying? Petto and, the two leading guys. I'm blanking out their names. They were from early 20th century.
Who was it? What was the context?
There was a movement that was called trompe l'oeil of American painters. And I'm blanking out their names. There were two kind of leading lights of that. And one of the paintings had a folded newspaper, and a pipe had fallen from its resting place, and the smoldering ashes had spilled from the pipe and were starting to ignite the newspaper. And to contemporary eyes, it's obvious right away that the smoke isn't moving. But when that was first exhibited, people were trying to go over and pat out the fire. Yeah. But it's not strictly a modern era concept because there's a story about a painter in Greece. It's a very old story about a painter in ancient Greece who painted a clump of grapes so well that flies kept trying to land on it. So, I have played around with the idea. And this hung for several years in a frame shop in downtown Gillette. And the quarters were kind of close. The next panel was about here. And the proprietor of the shop told me that frequently she'd be talking to someone over here and they'd glance that way and then duck out of the way because I thought that was, and I said, that's really nice validation of that
Yes.
effort. Because it's a flat piece of cardboard, but it has those dimples that the corrugation makes on old cardboard. And it had paint smears on it, and the paint smears had to match there. So I was making up the paint smears, but then trying to figure out where they would be and what shape they would be in the reflection. One of my students told me many years later that in my drawing class, she was observing that day, and I was holding up that mirrored ball. I call it a reflective ball. And when I used that term in my master's thesis, my mentor said, "Don't you mean reflectional?" And I said, "I've never heard that term." He said, "Is a reflective ball one that indulges in self-introspection?" I said, "No, it's one that reflects light." And so I went and got the dictionary and looked it up, and reflectional was there, but it said archaic in parentheses. And he was quite chagrined, but am I close enough to this for people to hear me by and large? Every now and then I move up closer and I kind of
That's good.
blow my ears out.
And this panel too, I think what was
Okay,
the other story behind that shape and all.
this one?
Yep.
I sang for 30 years with the Gillette Chamber Singers. And for the last 15 of those 30 years, I was bass baritone section leader. I retired from that about 6 years ago, and I have barely a speaking voice and certainly no singing voice left. So I sing to myself, and my wife endures it. But one of my fellow baritones was a really talented carpenter and a woodworker. He did a lot of very inventive finished carpentry for people's houses, and on the side he did wood turning, did a lot of really wonderful bowls and things. And he made me that panel because he had this piece of, I think it was pecan plywood, and he asked me if I wanted a piece of it, and I said, "Yeah, but could you make it an arched top?" And he brought me that with the frame built around it, except for the piece that I painted across it. Anyway, I was going to paint something from out of the wood grain on it because it was really fascinating, because I had done that a lot. I've done drawings that were based on the wood grain, directly on the wood. But he died suddenly a couple of years ago from a heart thing. He was much younger than I was. And I was in the middle of or getting toward the end of the ape thing. And I had that gorilla, and I sketched him on there in charcoal, and then I got this idea. Is there anyone in here who has not seen Star Wars? The title of that is, I blanked out the last word of it earlier, hang on. Oh yeah, it's called Wisdom Portal Kindred Council.
Will you repeat it one more time?
Kindred Portal.
Wisdom?
Wisdom Portal Kindred Council. So the gorilla is going for counsel to that chimp who's looking through a portal and is much enlarged, because chimps are nowhere near as big as gorillas. And I think of it as Luke Skywalker and Yoda. And then the birds at the top are ravens, because people who study those things say that ravens are roughly as intelligent as chimpanzees. They make tools, they do all kinds of amazing things.
They play.
Yeah. In fact, I just saw, well, all corvids, but I just saw a video of a crow with a plastic bottle cap carrying it to the top of a snow-covered roof and then riding it down and carrying it back up. So, and a rancher over by Shell at a art reception I was at a few years ago, we were talking about ravens, and he told me he watched them taunt a hawk out in one of his pastures, and they would, the hawk would dive at them, and they'd wait till the very last second and then fly out of the way, and he'd have to brake really fast to keep from smashing it around. And he said that went on for hours. It was, they're very clever birds. So I put a couple of them in that top piece just to, and that little bar going across was a half-hearted attempt at tomboy. That one has a different character than the ones that are on canvas because it's on wood. All these others, I sketched very sparely lines and then started to paint. And on that one, I fully developed the figures in different colors of Talk Dec crayon and then sprayed it really well and then started to paint. So a lot of the burden of describing those forms is done by the underdrawing. And then all of the layers of paint until you get to the highlights are transparent layers. So that allows light to penetrate all the way to the bottom layer. Then when it refracts differently as at each layer, and it creates when it's in the right kind of light, it gives you a feeling of actual depth. And I didn't figure that out. Somebody, Jan van Eyck, figured that out in about the 16th century. But it's a pretty cool idea. So as soon as oil paint was invented, somebody figured that out. I'm running out of ideas. Any other questions?
Well, you have the books to look through,
Yes.
so if you,
I'm going to leave those books here and pick them up when the show's over. I have 13 of those. I drew along with my students. When I retired, I had a pile literally this tall. And I edited out about probably 80% of them and picked the ones that I thought were successful. Some of which were very quick, very spare sketches, but worked. And some of them were very, they range from 3-minute drawings to 20, 30-minute drawings. And I picked 3 of the 13 books because I didn't want to carry them all over here. But
They're all your students' drawings?
no, they're my drawings of my students. Yeah. And I do have a couple things to say about that if you will indulge me for a few more minutes. For me, drawing is the fundamental language of visual art, no matter whether you're a potter or a photographer or anything else. Drawing can enrich what you're doing because it's a way of apprehending form that nothing else will teach you. And drawing from actual forms, not drawing from photographs. I draw from photographs a lot, but I didn't learn to draw from photographs. I learned from drawing from actual human figures, both nude and clothed, and from skeletons and from still life things, because what you see there is different than what a camera sees there. A camera sees from a fixed position, and you see from 2 positions, but also you're constantly moving. And I think drawing the human face and figure from life is one of the most essential things for a visual artist. And as I said, I've spent thousands and thousands of hours doing that. And I did it along with my students because it was useful for them to see that sometimes I crumbled the drawing up and threw it across the room because sometimes it just isn't working. So, getting tired? I am. But anyway, I'm going to leave those here if it's okay with Anika. My only request is that if you eat lunch, you wash your hands before you do that. Because they're on paper, and some of it's really bad. There's some of it's on that green manila paper that deteriorates pretty rapidly. And they're hand sewn, and the stitching gets loose. But feel free to look through them to your heart's content. Just please don't get motor oil or something on them, or cake. Some of them already have smudges of paint and stuff on them because they sat around their studio.
I'll leave them out for a bit today, but then I'll keep them in the art room, so if you want to come look at them later, you can come observe them closer.
Yeah.
Over time, his work will be up for 2 months too, so you've got time to think about more questions and we can talk more.
Well, some of the books that I picked, some of them, 2 of them I chose because they had a lot of longer studies of just the faces, sort of portrait style studies. And something that I've discovered is it's impossible to draw a good likeness from life if you don't have any empathy for that person that you're drawing. And in my classroom, I had very different kinds of kids. Some of them were likable and some were not. But if I wanted to draw them, I had to find some way to like them in order to make it work. And that was a pretty profound learning exercise for me, and I hope for my students too, that contrary to what you'll hear from certain people in power right now, empathy is a very valuable thing and an important part of who we are as people and as a nation. That's my only political comment for the day. But thank you very much. I need to sit down. But
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for
well,
coming.
yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being patient through an hour and 30 minutes almost.
Well, it's good because it was better than a movie. But you can rewatch this too. We have a YouTube channel. It's just the Buffalo Senior Center, so it'll be on there if you want to go back and listen. And
Better than which movie?
a lot of times nowadays,
Kids, not better than that.
movies nowadays are pretty bad. And it's about $30 to go to them. So this was
Well, that's-
free and much more
Okay. I'm sorry.
educational.
It's okay if it turns off.
Yeah.
If I can figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You did good. That's the great thing is we get to, I can listen for hours. That's the difference is it's like there, when you can keep thinking of more ways you relate to it too, you know,
I was thinking maybe 15 minutes would be good.
15. Well, time flies though, because you have 75 years of the way you relate to what you're doing, you know.
Well, I have a
So-
feeling that a few things more than
Yeah.
that. But
I'm glad you have
nevertheless,
your work up
I need to
because
sit down for at least 15 minutes.
you're good.
Thanks. Thank you very much. You're good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's been a
I
lot of fun.
appreciate it.
It would be nice too, in a couple of years, if you got a new series, you could come up on the walls again.
I'm working every day.
I know. So,
Actually, I have 3 more series since the show I had in October.
yeah,
Now, by the way, this is just a fraction, okay,
Of what I do.
of what he does.
Yeah.
So,
where do you store it all?
About 5 years ago, I had a shed built just for that,
Yeah.
and I filled it in less than a day with stuff that was in the garage. And now things are stacked all over again in the house and in the garage.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a big burden for my children. I don't want it to sound like I don't sell. I have sold things all over the country and in a couple of other countries,
Yeah.
but I don't sell enough to break even ever. And
make a plan, because like Nelchie had all her stuff, and you just say, well, I have all these paintings. Maybe you have some specifically in mind, you think this would go well here. But make sure that it goes to where people are gonna appreciate it, and it has a steward, because it is pretty absurd, the things that people will just throw away.
Yeah.
And that's part of the treasure hunt for me. I like finding random things, but
Well, I,
from here on out, anything that is handmade, especially art, is always gonna be what you pay worth. Honestly, I feel like it's easily already, I feel like I'm gonna make 5 times my money on something. A lot of the work we've had in here is very low on the price range for what you would see in a gallery for these sizes, is $10,000 to $20,000. But artists, we are really underprice our stuff, because it's not about that.
well,
But someday somebody else gets rich off of us.
if you go and scroll back on my Facebook page, I wrote a diatribe about that 2 years ago. Because that Broadway one, the King Kong, people kept complaining about the price. I had it priced at $4,500. So I took lots and lots of progress pictures of it, and they're all dated in my computer.
Yeah,
So I went and figured out how long I'd worked.
hours. How
Figured
many?
an average of hours a day, and took out the week that we were gone on vacation and the week that our grandson was here. And then looked up what plumbers make. And I came up with $40,000.
Yeah, wow.
Could have charged for it. And
That's
got
what-
the plumber's wage. And
Yeah.
I don't begrudge plumbers that. I hate doing plumbing. I'm willing to pay them whatever and thank them for it.
Yeah,
But people don't think of painting the same way.
my grandpa did leather work, and when he figured it up once, he realized he made $3.15 an hour.
Yeah.
So
That's
But-
doing well compared to some people.
a
When you look
lot, we
at,
just do it for fun, because
Well,
that's our passion and
right, and
what
there-
brings us
and
joy.
there are some of us, I've been asked, why don't you sell some of what you get? Because it isn't worth it, I'd rather give it away.
Yeah,
Because you can't pay me what it's worth it.
it's a piece of your heart. So if you give it away, but somebody loves it,
Yeah.
it's worse when you give those things away and then you realize they don't understand what it was, and you just gave it, and
Yeah.
it might go,
Yeah, you hear those stories all the
Well, my daughter gets angry with me because when I'm working on the series, the first couple of these I had offers to buy them, and I said, I can't, it's a series, I want to show them. And she's
oh, yeah.
really mad because I could have used that $4,500. But
So this is the first time you've shown these?
I showed them at my show in Casper.
Yeah, okay,
And I showed about 2/3 of it in Gillette a couple of years ago.
okay.
The rest of it has been finished since then. And it's an open set, there may be more to come.
Yeah. I like the flannel. Our friend did flannel over there with the plants.
I had that kind of about 3/4 done, and there was that snowy thing through there, and I said, it looks chilly out there, it makes me feel cold, so I had a flannel robe that I never wear, I tossed it in there.
That's awesome. That's the thing, they draw you in, and it should be about discovering it, and it, you don't know what you're gonna see in a painting, but you keep looking. Yeah.
And I did a thing like this, here goes a conversation. In Casper, as one woman said, she's looking at that kind of, it was a little brighter light stuff. And she said, they were asking about, she said, there's such longing in those eyes with that in the front. I said, no, that was me.
Yeah. Huh?
And some of them, like, when you're photographing gorillas in
Had a lot of traveling.
especially in indoor
Yeah.
big parts of them are in shadow.
Yeah.
You can't see it, you sort of make up the detail.
Yeah.
So sometimes what I do is sit on Google and scroll through 2,000 pictures of male
Yeah.
Western lowland gorilla.
Fill in the
And
blanks.
Look at their ears.
Yeah.
That's the drawing I'm working on now.
Huh.
I just kind of looked at a whole bunch of years that I made.
Yeah.
But photography is a good tool. It's not a good way to learn to draw.
Well, it's already flat.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can catch things, especially now. Well, I learned from Dana Hildebrand at Sheridan College. Was my first, when I first started oil painting and figurative type painting. And the funny thing is, she graduated from Bozeman in the 60s, but she was the same way and went with, she learned the studio arts and the traditional classical things instead of the abstract of the time. So I'm glad that I got to learn from her because we had life drawing. It's pretty hard to find a life drawing class because, you know, it's kind of prudish or whatever again. But
I have a lot of forms of abstraction, but the people who invented abstraction all were classically trained drawers.
that's what not everybody knows Jackson Pollock, but that's why he was revolutionary. He took house paint cheap from the hardware store and dribbled it on the floor, but he had gone to art school and knew better. You know, here, yeah, Cody. Yeah.
Better of abstract expression.
And that,
Wasn't he into like LSD and stuff too? Or?
he was a big drinker. That's what ended up killing him, actually. It was an accident. I think car accident.
You seen that movie where Ed Harris plays him?
Oh,
It's really good.
Yeah.
And Ed Harris's statement about that was he didn't know anything about Jackson Pollock. His father said in the book about Pollock and said, "You look good yesterday. You should play with me."
Oh, huh.
So,
That's funny.
are you ready to see this? Oh, okay.
Full chair.
Pull up the chair. Go ahead. Pardon me? 75. I'll be 76.
Have you been primarily at Gillette the whole time?
I moved to Gillette in 1978. I started exhibiting and so on when I was in grad school. I was 72 years old. And I lived in Ohio for 4 years. And I got in a lot of national and regional and a couple of international shows. Then we moved back here.
Mr. Jim, are you ready?
I lived in Ohio and got in shows in Chicago and New York. Not then. Don't see any money. Had to borrow money. It was, the daughter was about 2 years old. I was unemployed. But my wife and I went to Paris about 7 years ago. Paris and Amsterdam. I speak French.
A whole lot of people that
This group I sang with, the Gillette Chamber Singers, did a lot of tours in Europe. I got to sing in a lot of places. Not France. Briefly into France to take some
Spain?
Yeah, the last trip I went on.
Yeah.
To Spain. And then the delegate flew home with the choir and left me there. I was there another week by myself.
Yeah.
It was really fun. I got lost every single night getting back to my hotel in Barcelona. It was mostly because of sangria. Yeah.
overtired and we're.
Well,
I think someone's signed like this
Well, we have good phone service. I actually went to McDonald's one day. I didn't go in, I just went and sat on a sidewalk outside so I could use their Wi-Fi. Check in
Thank
with
you.
the family, you
You
know.
better.
But a lot of my art heroes are Spaniards. And Dutchmen.
So did you do one? Yeah.
Well,
But you're.
I learned
I'll give you a headache.
when we were in Ireland, went to the Irish National Gallery. I learned about some artists I'd never heard of who's
You
working.
got close, even if you're not actually sleeping.
Ireland's Lot 5 as a singer for visual art. There were some pretty good painters.
Thank you guys for coming.
I have some Irish ancestry.
Actually,
Man, I haven't talked that long at one time.
It's cool. Huh?
It's just great. My voice is Irish.
What's that? Lee met in high school in Lakewood, Colorado. We were, when I first started high school, I went to Bear Creek. And they had to, it was so large that the sophomore class was broken in two. And I worked in an afternoon session. And then when we became juniors, they had split, they had built two new schools. One was Colorado, the other was Green Mountain. We went to Green Mountain. We were head of the class for 2 years.
The best,
They didn't have seniors our junior year
our best,
because they didn't want to take them away from you.
Yeah.
But
That's
I
how.
ended up in Greeley at college
Thanks, guys.
and straight out of college to Gillette in 1980. Taught elementary, Chris, and
Yeah.
been there all over there.
I had a little more house around at high school, but you feel like
One of our two pottery teachers in Gillette grew up in the Virgin Islands. Alaska.
Oh, and Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know he was an actor?
Yeah,
Did you know Terry Quinn was?
I did.
I didn't. We were still going to the rec center a year ago. And I was in getting dressed and Terry was in that. And I said, "How you doing, Mr. Quinn?" And he looked at me and said, "I'm not Mr. Quinn." And he looked at me and caught me back there. He said,
Did you remember Kathy Quinn?
"Yeah, yeah."
She was,
Or before she was Quinn.
yeah, Kathy Marcus.
Yeah.
She was a music teacher and she taught right across from me. And we were both relatively new. We collaborated on a bunch of stuff, but
She was in the Chamber Singers when I first joined it. She was a good alto.
she was really a good person. And she was dating Terry now and again. I remember her confiding in me, "I'm not really sure I want to be with this guy." You know?
You know what? I had a spotty relationship with Terry. But when he disarmed that kid, remember that? The school district crucified him for that. He said that the protocol was he was supposed to report it and call the SWAT team. He was a principal at one of the junior highs. And it came to his attention that one kid had a gun. So he cleared out the room and he went into the room and talked the kid out of the gun. And he got
Problem solved.
blasted for it by the administration.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, I don't care what they say, you deserve a medal. He said, "No." I told them that if I had called SWAT, somebody would have done it. They would come in. He saved not just that kid's life, but probably his own and the other teacher who was in there. And they gave him a hard time. Last time I saw him was at Bev Sanders' husband, or Bev Sanders' funeral. Did you know her? She taught Virginia for many years.
She's trying to learn.
Yeah, when you are.
Okay. Well,
It's so good to meet you.
You were a teacher for a while.
a short while.
What did you teach?
Monsters.
Who did you teach? What did you teach?
Notice I didn't hesitate. Well,
They're all graduating at the same
a
time.
friend of mine got me signed up at Eastern. They had a recruitment fair, and I was selling cigarettes in South Dakota.
Bye-bye, right?
And well, that was a good way to do it. That friend got me into there was